And we are live. Hello, everyone. I'm Jessper Maquindang. And if you're here to build a stronger team and a more effective company culture, you're in the right place. In each episode, our guests share tips, strategies, and insights to help you and your people thrive. And I'm very excited to introduce today's guest. John M. O'Brien, PhD, is a professional speaker and executive coach who helps individuals and organizations create lower stress work environments that ignite employee engagement, increase productivity, and strengthen profitability. He is a licensed psychologist, professional speaker, and executive coach in Portland, Maine, with an over 30-year career in the mental health field as a clinician and adjunct faculty member at the University of Maine at Augusta. John is the author of numerous articles and books. His most recently released book is entitled Rudeness Rehab: Reclaiming Civility in the Workplace and Your Home Space. Let's welcome Dr. John M. O'Brien. John, great to see you. Thank you for joining us today.
Jessper, thank you so much for having me and having me back.
Yes, great to see you again and really expand on our conversation. And I'm really looking forward to it with today's topic, especially dealing with difficult people. And there's a lot of research on that. I was curious to know the statistics and data that you're familiar with, and you'd like to share with us as well.
Absolutely. And when I think about difficult people, first of all, I think about it as a continuum, all the way from, what I've written about, which is kind of rudeness and incivility on the one hand, all the way to the other extreme of kind of workplace violence. So when you look, let's start at that end. When you look at the incidence of workplace violence and awful to say murders in workplaces, that really peaked in the 1990s and is down. But the statistics I found most recently, there are about 524 murders last year in workplaces of people. So that's certainly down, but it still is an awful number to hear. But the other interesting statistic, again, not surprising to me, is the people who are most at risk of violence in the workplace are healthcare workers. Healthcare workers these days are 5 times more likely to experience violence than other occupations. And it says about 93% of the assaults are committed against the healthcare workers. So
wow.
So it's, ideally you don't go into a work environment and experience an assault, but here are people who are trying to help others in terms of health, and they themselves are the targets of assault. So that's one of the continuum. We then have the experience of bullying, which, as I think about it, is intentional intimidation or behaviors to push someone to do something or not do something. And the rates of bullying, despite the fact there's a great knowledge, I think, now about the impact of bullying, about 30% of workers in the US say they've experienced being bullied at work, which is about up to 52 million Americans, workers. And then when you add in just even witnessing bullying, you say about 49% of workers have at least seen it. And what we know from the literature is also you don't have to be the specific target of something to also be impacted by it. And then finally, we have the statistics around incivility and rudeness. And the Society of HR Management, I think, has done a nice job of starting to track this on a quarterly basis. And in their most recent quarter that I found in 2025, they said incivility in the workplace had risen 21% from the first quarter in 2025 as compared to the first quarter of 2024. And about 70% of workers had either witnessed or experienced incivility in the last month. And when you look at ultimately, the thing that really businesses pay attention to is what is the actual cost of this for them? Just incivility costs businesses about $2 billion with a B dollars every day. So that just gives you a sense about the impact of the range of difficult behaviors that we find and how much that distracts from people's ability to focus on the work they're there to do.
Thank you for sharing the research. John, I wanted to get your thoughts and reactions with the data you just shared. What are your perspectives on how you view these pieces of research?
Well, I think I first of all, in terms of that far into the continuum, workplace violence, I was curious. That's not my expertise, but just to do a little bit of a look at that, it was interesting to hear that although the rates are down, they certainly are still too high to have anybody go to work and experience being killed in the workplace. And this is important to distinguish. This is not from an accident. There are plenty of people who unfortunately die, like in the construction industry, through accidents. These are people who were dying through assaults. So that's, I think, and I think to see, although I knew that there's a lot of pushback against people in healthcare these days, I think there are these belief systems out there that healthcare workers are purposefully trying to withhold treatment or giving people treatments that don't work. So there's all this anger people have, and unfortunately, then they vent it against healthcare workers. So I think it's surprising for me to hear that. I'm not surprised by the statistics around bullying, and I think my mission around incivility and rudeness is to get people to think about the negative impact that has on individuals who are the target of incivility, but also people who witness incivility, and even boomeranging back to the person, him or herself, who's being uncivil. So, the lower we get on the continuum of the difficult behaviors, I think it's easy for people to miss the negative impact that some of these things are having, because violence in the workplace, overt violence, is way different from someone just rolling their eyes or saying some snarky comment, and realizing that still has an impact.
John, thank you for sharing your perspectives. And there is plenty of research in this field, and I was also looking into it, and I found something from the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM. They've discovered that 57% of employees reported experiencing rude or disrespectful behavior at work at least once a month, and this is up from 49% in 2019. So this is a 2023 survey, and that is an 8% increase since then. Wanted to get your thoughts.
Yes, I think it fits with the research that I've seen, which is just that rates of rudeness and incivility just continue to be on the rise. I think the pandemic. So I think one of the things you cited was 2019, and then in comparison to 2023, unfortunately, I think the pandemic really supercharged people's rudeness and incivility, and it has not subsided.
Oh, that's very interesting. Another piece of research that I discovered is from Harvard Business Review, and they discovered that 12% of people leave their jobs because of persistent incivility. Wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yes, I think once again, it's that businesses, that's part of the $2 billion per day impact on businesses. And part of that is about loss of employee, leaving because of incivility that they are experiencing from others. And sometimes I think in certain workplaces, there can be people who are highly productive individual contributors. And so workplaces may tend to tolerate the negative behavior from those people because they bring in business or because they are so productive. But what people fail to look at is what are the other costs? That's what people are bringing in, but what are the costs associated with those bad behaviors, and quote, bad behaviors? And now businesses are recognizing that, employee retention and having to replace employees and the costs associated with that really erode sometimes the contributions someone is making that are seen as so valuable.
Interesting. And that's an excellent point. And one more piece of research that I wanted to share is from Pew, and they discovered that 34% of people report they almost always or very often see rude behavior in public. Wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yes, I think that, I don't know if you would agree, but all you need to do is go out into the world, go to the supermarket, or go to the store, or be in a restaurant. And of course, I am very much alert right now to these behaviors. So I mean, maybe I'm seeing it more, but I think it's I'm surprised that at that level that you said the percentage is 34% people seeing rude.
34% according to Pew Research.
Yeah, I think that number vastly actually underestimates now the amount of rudeness that's out there in society, and I think it's certainly the level of rudeness and incivility is driven by kind of what's going on at a cultural level, and I think many people are experiencing high levels of stress.
Thank you for sharing, John. Let's take a deeper dive into this topic, dealing with difficult people. John, can you tell us more about your journey and what really brings you into this field of research?
Sure. Well, first of all, I would just say, if I may, that if I was to ask you, which I won't, Jesper, but if I was to ask you to identify, think of the people that are most difficult for you. We're not going to call out their names here, but I mean, my guess is you could probably come up with some in your mind fairly quickly about who do you struggle with, who's hard to cope with, or and so when I tell people that, they're like, oh yeah, I can come up with people right away. Well, the newsflash is that other people who are asked that question may have you at the top of their list. That dealing with difficult people doesn't mean that whoever is the difficult person is necessarily being difficult. It's that they're difficult for us to cope with. So yes, it could be, as I'm saying, the far end of the continuum of like assaults or bullying or incivility. But sometimes the people we struggle with who are difficult for us are simply people who are kind of being themselves, but they just rub us the wrong way or we clash, and we may do that with others. So I guess I would start by just saying, hopefully that builds in some empathy for us to have for other people. The people that we struggle with is to recognize there are other people who struggle with us. And what brought me to this work is having worked with clients now for over 30 years, doing psychotherapy for trauma and addiction with individuals and teaching them skills to manage reactivity, skills to improve their interpersonal relationships, sort of having done that. And then in 2017, I heard Dr. Christine Porath speak, who's like one of the real leaders in the field of research about incivility and the negative impact it was having. And it was like a light bulb went off for me to bring these two things together, to bring together the level of rudeness that we see in our society, and then skills. And I think seeing what happened during the beginnings of the pandemic really is what prompted me, that I thought, I have to write this book that's been in my head for a few years. And that's what really got me on this journey now, and which a journey I'm still on, to complete a second book on the same topic and really try to get out there to get the message across that we have a choice as a society and as a world society about how we treat each other.
That's an excellent point, John. And as we take a deeper dive into the topic, let's talk about the importance of this subject. Could you tell us more about why people should be paying more attention to dealing with difficult people and the value of it?
Well, I think as a business, from a business perspective, understanding that what is seemingly inconsequential behavior, that just for a moment, in terms of the three kinds of incivility that you can see, there's interpersonal, sort of rolling your eyes, snickering at something someone says, making a negative comment to someone. There's that interpersonal component. But then there's also cyber incivility, posting some negative comment in social media, writing a negative comment about someone in the Zoom chat or in Slack, or writing a very pointed email. And then finally, there's what's called victimless incivility, which is leaving a mess behind you, leaving dishes in the sink at work for other people to clean, leaving the photocopier jammed, leaving just a smidge of coffee in the coffee maker and not bothering to start a new pot for other people. The message with that is that my time is more important than yours. You can clean up my mess. All those things have an impact on people and have an impact on their feeling about being at work, on their productivity, on their whether they show up or whether they're absent. There are the snowball impacts of things that are seemingly inconsequential. So from a business perspective, seeing that there are negative impacts for the bottom line of the business. And from the personal side, I think people need to understand that there are very real health consequences for putting up with chronic rudeness and incivility in the workplace, and what that leads to in the short term, in terms of stomach aches, headaches, GI disturbance, sleep disturbance, and sometimes then leading up to clinical anxiety or clinical depression in the short term. And then in the long term, that can really aggregate if people are in chronic situations that lead and contribute to cardiac problems and immune disorders and cancers and other more serious illnesses. So I think it's important people recognize from a health perspective, psychologically and physically, that these small behaviors do add up and have a real negative impact.
John, those are excellent points. And I wanted to go back to an idea that stood out, and it was this idea of victimless incivility. Is that related to passive aggressive behavior?
So, passive aggressive behavior is with a purpose. It's to send a message. So passive aggressive behavior, is not doing something to purposefully send a message. So, if you write me an email, we're colleagues, and you write me an email and say, I've got this report that's due at, by 5 p.m. I really need your portion, so I can get this completed. Please send it to me. And I either don't send it, or I send it at 5:01 p.m. Oh, sorry, like purposefully doing that just to sort of mess with you. That's kind of passive aggressive behavior. It's not acting, but with a purpose of somehow sending a message that I'm angry at you or something. Victimless incivility is a little bit different in that the person is not intentionally trying to send a message to someone, although a message gets sent to the other person. It's like, oh, great. So, my job is to do your dishes. But it isn't the intention of the other person to send that message. Perhaps they're just not thinking it. They're just not processing. They're kind of going about their day and just kind of leaving this mess. So I think the difference is intentionality.
That is a very interesting distinction. And then, John, thank you for sharing. And let's continue to take a deeper dive. And I was curious, when it comes to dealing with difficult people, what are the roots of difficult behavior in others?
Well, I think the primary root, as I see it, is poorly managed stress. That there's so much stress in our society right now. And sometimes people don't have skills. They don't know how to use assertiveness skills. They don't have skills of self-awareness. They've never developed them in their lifetime. They've not had the opportunity. And so sometimes it's people either don't have skills or stress bubbles over. And even though they have skills, they just reach a breaking point and aren't able to use them. They just kind of, explode. So sometimes, and I'd say the vast majority of time, it's a result of poorly managed stress. Now, it can also be people have untreated or undertreated mental health symptoms. Sometimes it's that people have significant depression or anxiety that either is getting treated but maybe not effectively enough, or they're just having an upheaval, at the moment. It can also be people are caught up in the throes of addiction, and maybe they have either they're actively using, and that results in the behavior, or they're physiologically in withdrawal from having, for example, been out drinking heavily the night before, and that causes them to engage in problematic behavior with others. But by the way, I would just throw in too, I've heard this, I talk about rudeness and incivility kind of interchangeably. Some people make the distinction that rudeness is intentional, incivility is not. But for what it's worth, I disagree, because I think people can be rude without intending to be rude. So just like that, people aren't necessarily trying to come across as rude, but nonetheless, that could be the effect of their behavior. Now, people also can be intentionally rude, but few people, I think, wake up in the morning and think, how can I go about getting under other people's skin today?
That's a very interesting distinction. And that leads to the next question I had for you. And I was curious to know, what factors contribute to toxic and difficult work environments?
Well, I think that when people are given tasks and they don't have enough training to do the tasks, or there are not clear expectations for the tasks or clear directions for the task, and then they get into trouble because they've not followed what the boss has expected, even though they've not been given any clear guidelines. I think when you have that over and over, that dynamic contributes to a toxic work environment when there is not psychological safety. And just to make sure, I'm sure people have heard that term, but if psychological safety is present, people feel comfortable speaking their mind, offering their opinion, offering their ideas about something in a way that's going to, like, all ideas are welcome and supported, and they're not going to be shamed or devalued. If that isn't present, psychological safety, that's going to create a toxic work culture. I think when there are people who dominate conversations in work meetings, or who always have to kind of be showboating and show that they're right, and leaving out other people, that kind of creates a problematic dynamic. It doesn't feel like everybody has an equal voice. Or I've known cases in which workers have purposefully sabotaged the workflow of someone else, or not given them things, or tried to purposefully do a task better and not give their colleague all the information just to look better to the boss. So I think a lot of problematic interpersonal dynamics. And I guess the last thing I would mention is when you have someone is, like I was alluding to before, who's a really perhaps productive individual contributor, but who is really toxic for people to work with. And when that behavior, or really other toxic behaviors I've described, when that's either tolerated or kind of a blind eye is turned to those behaviors, and maybe it also trickles down in the organization, it's that when things like this are going on at the higher levels of an organization, they tend to trickle down, and that really then creates toxic cultures at a number of different levels of the organization.
John, those are excellent points. And this sense of psychological safety, such an important foundation for building a productive work environment. And the next question I have for you, you did share some perspectives on it earlier, but we are taking a deeper dive. And I was curious to learn more about the negative effects of rude and difficult behaviors in the workplace on health of individuals.
Sure. So I think it's some of what we've already talked about, that people can certainly be distracted by the rude and uncivil behavior of others, and again, also in terms of they then spend much of their time at work plotting and planning how they're going to get back at the other individuals. So I know we're talking about health perspective, but just from a workflow perspective, it causes a great deal of distraction. But I think the idea of how it contributes to headaches, stomach aches, sleep disturbance, concentration problems, irritability, and then often in cases where situations like this exist, it's not a one-off. It's either every day, or it's one of those situations where you kind of never know when some explosion's going to happen or something's going to happen. And so either way, it can lead people to feel like they are walking on eggshells. And that level of stress over the long term often then, leads people who have fewer psychological resources to tolerate that, or physical, to then end up getting sick. And that leads to short-term disability claims, and sometimes people going out on medical leave for a longer period of time because of that. And I've known offices that people are out for months and months because of a toxic, difficult work situation. So it has a negative impact on the bottom line of the business, but it also really erodes the health of the employee. And I would just toss in here that my own dad was 49 when he was dealing with a very stressful, difficult work environment as a sales manager, and he ended up having a major heart attack. and almost died, but his heart was so damaged, both from a heart attack and from what had gone on before that, that he was never able to work again and died young at 63. So this is where we think sort of stressful, difficult work environments don't have real world impacts on people's health, but they do.
It has a real impact.
Yeah.
Excellent points. Thank you for sharing, John. And in striving for a better world, how can workers most effectively deal with difficult behaviors at work?
Well, I think I first think of what my advisor in my doctoral program would always do with me. When I was complaining, I would flop into her office and complain about the latest thing with another faculty member or a peer, and she would smile and wait like a cat in front of a mouse hole. And then she would say, "And what part of this is about you?" I always hated that. What do you mean about me? It's not about... But I guess it is important for us to always think, not that there is necessarily something, but when you have a difficult situation and you're dealing with a difficult person, you want to start and think, okay, is there something I'm doing or not doing, maybe, that's perhaps contributing to the situation? Some facial expression I have that I'm not aware of, something I'm saying that sounds rude, I don't mean to. So I always encourage people to just reflect on, is there any component that's about you? Now, having said that, if you kind of are clear that there isn't something, well, then I think it's going to depend upon what's your role in the organization and what's your role in reference to the difficult person. If this person is a peer and you have a good relationship with them, but you've just suddenly experienced some sort of difficulty, if it's a one-off, well, maybe you feel comfortable going and talking with them. If that's it's someone who you have often struggled with, I still sometimes encourage people to think about, is it possible that you could set up a meeting with them to talk about, wondering if we could talk about how we could work together more effectively, and to try to talk about communication issues. You can also ask around, if you don't know the person really well, to see, what do other people know about that person's capacity to self-reflect and maybe be open to feedback and to work things through. If you think that's possible, great. And you might also be consulting with your boss, your manager, or maybe to consult, just get information from HR about how to approach that. I see this also as a continuum of things you do, that failing that, or if that feels like that's not possible, then maybe talking to your boss about, if it's a peer, about doing a mediation with you and the other person, or a communication meeting, or maybe asking HR to do that. It also may be kind of at the next level that if you try that, it doesn't work, then it maybe means you need to sort of get into more of a formal HR process. And again, depending upon the difficult behavior we're talking about, it also can be maybe that you need to be thinking about talking more to HR specifically about things like hostile work environment, or consulting with an attorney to see. I had someone that I work with who recently went through something like this, and the work environment was not addressing the inappropriate behavior of his supervisor. And he tried with HR, that didn't work, and ultimately the organization did not respond. And ultimately he had to go to an attorney and leave his position. So it really, I encourage people, start with yourself and then stepwise think about what's possible in terms of trying to address it more casually, less formally with others, all the way up to something more formal if that's needed.
Excellent points. And I like the example that you shared with your doctoral advisor and mentor. This idea of intentional reflection, very valuable, especially when it comes to dealing with difficult people.
Yes.
And in that, one more question I wanted to ask you is, what is your number one strategy for dealing with difficult people?
So sort of tied for number one would be a two-pronged thing. One is, as I just mentioned, how is this about me? What am I doing or not doing? But something else I often encourage people to reflect on when you're dealing with the difficult behavior of others is the exact opposite, which is, how is this not about me? Meaning that I think it's so easy for us when someone else's behavior is directed towards us to assume that their behavior then is about us. And in fact, even though it's being directed towards us, that doesn't mean it's about us. This may be someone who doesn't understand the impact of their behavior, and they treat others as well that way. Or it may be that the person has just learned that they have some sort of real serious health issue. And that, we're taking the fact that they're being clipped in their conversation with us or being short, we're taking it personally. So I encourage people to always reflect on the idea of, how is this not about me? And therefore, what might be going on with the other person? And if you can get out of yourself and out of personalizing the situation, that sometimes is helpful in thinking about how you can more effectively respond.
Excellent points. And John, as I was reading your bio, I know you're an author. I was just curious to learn more about your most recent book, Rudeness Rehab. Just curious to learn more about what inspired you to write that book, and could you give us a key takeaway?
Sure. Well, I would say that, again, it goes along with what I was experiencing during the pandemic and the idea that people were treating each other poorly, and especially healthcare workers. I was, seeing that in the news and hearing about it from the healthcare workers I work with. I'm in coaching, and how frustrated and overwhelmed that they were, and really at a loss for how to deal with some of the situations that they were facing. And I was doing my best to kind of tell the people that I worked with individually some of the skills to be using. But I felt like I wanted to take my message to the masses, to empower more people around this. And that was really the reason for writing the book. The book really is in 3 parts. The first part is to build the case for why we need to take rudeness and incivility seriously, why it's an issue, why it's more profound and has more profound an impact than people realize. Part 2 is about intrapersonal, internal skills that people can use, like grounding, like a basic mindfulness strategy. Or then also the third part is about a few interpersonal skills that people can use, things that people can use to manage relationships. And I guess one skill that I would just offer to your listeners is, and I didn't create this, I've just simply applied this to the idea of rudeness, but the acronym WAIT. Why am I talking? So, when you find yourself getting frustrated and pulled into a difficult conversation with someone based on something rude that they've said, to try to recognize, okay, I'm now caught up in some sort of verbal sparring with a person. Is this really useful? Is this really effective? And maybe to just, with that awareness, that intentional reflection in the moment, to decide, okay, should I continue? Is this worth continuing? But I sort of have put a new spin on the WAIT, WAIWTT, which is, why am I wanting to talk? Basically, just to say, in any moment, if someone's being rude, sometimes the best response is no response at all. And for you to think about, do I even need to respond to this? So I would just encourage people to think about recognizing and remembering each of us can only be in charge of our own behavior. And so deciding, when is it time I need to stop talking, or when is it time I need to not even start talking?
John, that's a great tip, especially with that WAIT acronym. And before we wrap up, John, I'd like to know, what is the best way for people to reach you should they want to learn more about you and the work you do?
Oh, that would be wonderful. So I think the website for my professional speaking and coaching business is at activatesuccess.org, activatesuccess.org. And then for the work that I'm doing more specifically around rudeness and incivility, people can check out rudenessrehab.com. So it's rudenessrehab.com. And there I have a collection of videos, some information about the book and other information about the speaking that I have done and will do around the topic.
Excellent. And John, before we go, what is your final piece of wisdom for our audience?
I want to offer people a note of hope. These, I think, certainly in our country and really also around the world, when I've talked to friends, people are very scared, anxious about some of the things that are going on, and feel very disempowered about how awful things are in our society. And I would agree. I'm not a Pollyanna to say that they aren't. But what I would say is take heart in the idea that change what you can, change your world, change the way that you treat others, regardless of how they are responding to you. Because in any system, if one part of the system makes a change, it has ripple effects and can benefit other people. So don't forget the power that you have as an individual to change not just your life, but the lives of others too.
John, excellent piece of wisdom. And John, thank you again for today's conversation. Really had some great takeaways, learning how to deal with difficult people, the concepts of rudeness, the concepts of incivility. Really appreciate what we've gathered today. To everyone out there, we do hope you gathered some great takeaways as well. If you know any leaders who could benefit from this conversation, please feel free to share this with them. And last but not least, John, thank you again for such a wonderful and valuable conversation. And to everyone out there, thank you again. I'll see you in the next episode.